Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Today we have the pleasure to have Bob Stutz with us as our special guest, and we would like to talk and rethink about, does CRM get back on track? And don't be surprised, because Bob looks a bit in the moment, still concerned if his sound is working. Try to give us a word, Bob. Okay, we are a bit in the silent mode, right? So I do my introduction.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
No, there we are.
Okay, that was a human technical error on my part here.
Honest, this is technology, and we love those hurdles if we overcome them, and we are still smarter than some of the technology. Welcome, Bob.
Maybe we should make the system smarter.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is one of the interesting topics, as we will touch not only the technology which is enabling CRM, CX, and all the benefits we could get and see, but having Bob with us, who has been over 3 decades shaping the landscape of customer relationship management. Bob has rightfully earned his reputation as the guru of CRM, and his journey through the industry's giants includes names such as Siebel Systems, where Bob, when you heard him in earlier shows and in the CRM Pliers show, that he is still fond of about the depth and the broadness of the system, where he has a lot of time and heart and brains invested in. He has been with SAP, he has been with Microsoft and Salesforce, then back with SAP before his, let's say, some people would call it retirement, but from my perspective as an outsider, I would say, take a big, deep breath, look into everything inside and pick those cherries from the cake, which are still so interesting that you love to keep busy on the topic. Known for his usually candid and sometimes controversial perspectives, it's always a lot of fun because he has always an extra show he created himself. No bullshit with Bob Stutz, and exactly that made us very curious when he continues to be actively influencing the CRM world, most recently with the appointment to Sugar's CRM Board of Directors. And he is now he's irritating me with
Bob, you are an unknown entity.
Yeah, you know, I'm just a simple country boy from the Alps nowadays.
Yeah, and
okay, yeah, well, then you are the best guised wolf in the sheep's clothes to say so, because we know that there is something behind the curtain of the country boy. So, welcome, Bob. The floor is yours, and we are grateful that you could make it today.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
you know.
It's always a good time to talk to you.
It's always a good time to talk.
We should do that more often. Stir some.
You know, I try to keep a low profile nowadays, you know.
Well, it's not that low if you're becoming a board member of a tiny little company like Sugar.
Yeah, it's still, you know, it's low key. I just, I prefer nowadays to just do a lot of reading, a lot of research, you know. Playing around with all the so-called, you know, smart agents that are still freaking dumb as can be, you know.
Which pretty much gives a segue into dear friend and troublemaker, the brohammer John Reed, who has a question, which is actually even better than what we thought of.
Actually, it's a very good question. Yeah. Actually, I have to say, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this lately and experimenting with a lot of the AI tools that are out there. And to be
So
quite
this was the other part.
I would build my own. I would absolutely build my own applications and not be tied to a software vendor at the end of the day. I think tools are becoming more and more critical. I think they're getting better. I think that I do think that, look, vendors play an important part today. I mean, it's hard for companies to just get off vendors. But even with vendors, like, just think about it, right? Take any implementation, Salesforce, Microsoft, whichever one you want to pick. And then look at all the add-ons that vendors actually put with that core product, right? And think about that. They spend a small fortune on just add-ons, right? So the question is the base CRM product still relevant in today's world? Right now, yes. A couple years from now, I don't think so anymore. I actually think there'll be new applications that sprout up that are truly AI based. I recently have been spending time with the founders of a small company out of Belgium called askdana.com. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this stuff.
Not
Nope.
yet.
Smart AI.
Donna, we yet not know, but we would.
You guys should look at this stuff. Actually, they're selling into a lot of customers of Salesforce, Microsoft, Sugar, everybody. And what they've done is they've truly built a what I would call a truly interactive SFA, add-on, which basically, it's so interactive, right? It calls the sales rep. It does all these things, right? And when you see this, it's actually one of those use cases for AI that you go, God, why didn't somebody do this a long time ago? Right? Because as we know, voice in this business has been a disaster. It has not worked, right? You can look through all of them, Einstein voice, all of the ones, the early versions of Cortana with Microsoft, even Copilot nowadays. I mean, the voice is just not truly interactive in a excuse me, in a push way.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see this application called askdana.com, what these guys have done and what they've built is pretty amazing, actually. I have to say, it takes a lot to get me excited about software nowadays, but when you see something that really can change the game and really turn, what I call a dumb CRM system into a smart one that actually helps the salesperson do their job, it's pretty amazing,
Mm-hmm.
And we're not just talking about some agent that's been slapped on, right? This thing is really intelligent, and it truly can save a sales rep an immense amount of time and energy by doing the work for them. But if you get a chance, you should look at it. It's actually a very interesting, I always find it interesting, like looking at a lot of the different AI products out there, right? And, some of them not very good, others mediocre. But, when you come across one that really does solve a critical problem and does it in a way that is truly interactive and intelligent, it's the kind of stuff that you hope you see more and more of, right? And I do believe as time goes on, I think you're going to see a lot of, I think what will happen is, we always talk about composable architectures, right?
Yeah.
But now we need to decompose. And we need to break apart all those things, right? And build applications that are very specific for a cause, right? That solve a critical problem, right? Not some large freaking system that at the end of the day, a customer is going to be stuck with forever and ever, Right. I do believe that the new world is about, years ago, I used to talk about, and people used to think I was crazy, right? I used to talk about the new world of applications that were fluid, right? That had dynamic UIs that were based on, what you were trying to do, right? I don't think we're far away from that now with AI. Actually, I think we're getting closer and closer. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the new world, right? Yeah, but in order to get there, companies still have to solve a basic critical problem, which is data.
Good one.
Because most companies aren't at a point where they actually can take advantage of a lot of this stuff because of data, right? And, there's still a lot of silos, right? You look across enterprises, you see a lot of silos, right? Just think of the things you use every day, like a bank, right? Silos still exist in banks, right? They have a hard time. But just imagine if they were actually able to do what they should have been doing for decades, which was actually to bring their data together in a very clean, smart way. Just think of how much better the service would be towards their customers, right? Especially with AI nowadays, right? But if the data's not there, then, and like, I love the fact that like Salesforce talks about, making agents, everybody and their brother can build an agent, right? But let's be really clear. Smart, intelligent agents cannot be built by every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the street. It's not going to work.
Oopsie.
Right. I mean, it's what you put into these things, right? You have to put a lot of thought into them, right? And you see good ones and bad ones out there, right? I use this service called Factor. Do you guys know what this is? They deliver meals to your door once a week, right? Especially during the week when busy and and so. But they always claim they have this great, AI agent that, can solve all your problems, right? So whenever I see those types of comments, I have to go and actually play with the agent to see if it actually works. And this morning was so frustrating because the agent comes on and all I wanted to do is ask a simple question. Can you freeze these meals? Couldn't understand. This is a food company. Like a simple thing. They send you a prepackaged meal. Like it's like, fresh delivery, whatever those things are called, right? But these are pre-cooked, right? They're in a nice thing. You pop it in the microwave. Like it's a fancy TV dinner, right? Mm-hmm. So, but it's fresh. It doesn't come frozen, right? So simple question. Can I freeze these meals before they expire so that I can warm them up at a later date? Totally screwed up this agent completely. Couldn't answer, couldn't say, kept asking me to repeat. Can you ask it a different way? 20 times. Can you ask it a different way? So that's why these agents, this is not about people going off and just building thousands and thousands of agents at the end of the day, right? If you want to do it and do it right, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of data and it takes a lot of training for these agents to actually be able to do the right stuff. Yeah. Now, I have had some experiences recently with something I ordered online where there was an agent that I have to say was very efficient, very effective at what I needed to do, as long as I stayed in the boundaries of that.
Here we go.
And I think that's the key here, right? Is these things do have boundaries, right? Yeah. And so it's all about the amount of effort you put into to really training these things and programming them at the end of the day, right? It's not like you just put up an agent, right? It doesn't work like that.
Well, it needs a meta agent that delegates, which needs to get trained as well.
Which needs to be trained as well.
Yeah. So that's the fun part of it. And this is something that.
But then you have to ask yourself, right? you really have to ask yourself, are we just fooling people by calling these things agents when in fact they're no better than some of the bots that have been around for a long time?
Or
Right.
They just have a better vocabulary.
They have a better vocabulary, and maybe they can do a few more things, but the reality is they're still not any better than the bots that have been around. I mean, look, if you look at some of those bots, the really good bots that were around, right? There were some really good ones, right? Especially in the service arena, right? That were capable of doing. So I'm not sure we've gotten much better, right? And with these so-called agents. I mean, you hear everybody talking about agentic AI, agents. Microsoft, Satya just announced, I don't know how many it was, hundreds of thousands of agents, whatever it was, that have been deployed, right? You got Mark Benioff talking about all the agents that people are doing, right? But the reality is, where is it, right? Where are these things, right? I mean, I do think that these things, I think they're overhyped again, right? We've overhyped the technology that really still is not ready for prime time, actually.
We still have little kids around the corner, and we try to educate them to get smarter, faster, more precise, more effective, but it will take time, and we are not giving them the time. We are impatient, and
that's because we overhype everything, right?
Bingo.
And which has happened every time we have a new technology breakthrough. We overhype it to the point where it becomes, at some juncture, everybody gets frustrated, right? They take on this new technology, they try to do things with it, and what happens, right? What happens to it? It dies off eventually. Right. You can go back just over the last 5 years of all just in the CRM space. If you look at all the technologies, right. And you look at the new ones that were introduced and what's happened to them, right. They've sort of disappeared.
Let me throw a little wrench there. So yes, it's likely not yet prime time. And no, I don't want them to gradually improve. When I employ an agent or a bot, it better functions right away. So this thing that it's probably as good as an intern and becomes better from then is, in my eyes, totally misguided. So this like, I just had a look at the Ask Donna page. If this works like that, it's great. Also, if it's getting traction, even greater. I can remember doing a prototype of that at an DSAC meeting in 20, or was it 19, where I presented exactly that as a use case, and nobody cared
nobody cared about it.
A flying
Actually, I can remember years ago we did several prototypes around this kind of stuff, and it never took off. But I mean, the Ask Donna one, the reason I can talk about it, because I've used it, and I have to say it's pretty freaking phenomenal, right? And
why does it work
now?
Why does it work now? Why is it accepted now? You said they have quite some traction.
I think it's accepted now. Well, two things, right? One is the technology is much better.
Okay.
And the ability to have interactive AI technology has come a long way, right? I mean, true interactivity, right? That's a key thing, right? True interactivity, right? Where it can be hard to distinguish, are you talking to a machine or are you talking to another human being, right? And I think the technology keeps getting better and better in that regard. And I think as time goes on, it'll get to a point where it truly, as the machines get smarter, right? Now, I'm not a fan. I don't think machines will replace humans. I think machines will replace redundant tasks that a lot of times have to be done. I I think it'll help people work smarter, but I'm not convinced about replacing people at the end of the day, right? And we see these things in the industry lately, people getting laid off, and then you see the little blurb from the tech company. Well, it's because of AI. We have to retrain new people. Or then you start seeing these things about how humans need to learn to coexist with digital workers. What is that? Why would I coexist with a digital worker at the end of the day? Because we're already in a digital world. We have to coexist with digitization today, right? We have been for a long time, right? Think about interactive voice response systems, right? You can go down, right? All these things were sort of digital workers at the end of the day, but I just hate that term. And I hate when I hear people putting humans on and digital workers in the same sentence, right? Because I don't think that's a reality, right? Now, maybe 20 years from now, it may be a reality, but when you have robots who are sitting next to you doing a job, which, at some juncture, who knows, that could be. But I think actually in the CRM space, companies would be much better off if they just freaking focused on making the software better at the end of the day.
I think John sums it up.
Yeah.
I don't want digital teammates. And I agree. I mean, I think it's such a weird concept. And when you hear people talk about it, like it's going to be the norm, I just don't see that. It's not going to be the norm in my world. That's for sure.
Yeah. René Soll gives it another twist coming from the data point. So they learn from our data. Caveat, the contract usually says that they don't learn when called via the API. How about regulation there? I mean, there is the AI Act, which is...
Europe's an interesting case because, Europe wants to be a leader in AI. But the reality is it will never be a leader in AI. And the reason for that is because of regulation at the end of the day. I mean, look, I love living in Germany. It's been my, I live in the Alps. I love it. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But when it comes to, I feel like I'm back in the 1960s in Germany when it comes to automation and digitalization. And, I mean, the country has not moved forward, and it's because of the regulation in the country, right? A lot of things that could be done by any citizen online still cannot be done in this country today, right?
Well, I beg to disagree. Regulation is not the problem there.
But it is. The privacy laws.
Regulation is a symptom, but not the problem.
Well, the government's the problem at the end of the day, and it's the
culture.
It's the culture, right? Culture. I mean, which leads to the overregulation in a lot of things, right? I mean, simple things, right? Like being able to go online and take care of a simple renewal. Right.
Yep.
Instead, I have to go to the Landratsamt, which takes 40 fucking people to figure out what needs to be done. And then you're lucky if people show up to work because, well, people just, and God help you if you go on a Wednesday, because Wednesday, everything's closed in this country. Right. I mean,
and Saturday and Sunday.
And Saturday and Sunday. Right. I mean, Europe is still stuck in a different time period. And I think that it's, unless it gets out of that and moves forward, I don't ever see it being a leader in the AI space, which is unfortunate because there are brilliant people here trying to do that, right? But it's just very tough at the end of the day.
But you made one very clear statement, such as not the big bang, completely cake of application is the name of the game, but focus to some dedicated task in assisting, such as helping in your Landratsamt to get the formulas and all these forms and sheets you have to fill, and somebody has to prepare, check, control, and get that automated in a smart way with intelligent assistants, such as one player in Germany, Aleph Alpha, is going with the Ministry of Social Work and Education and some other stuff in Baden-Württemberg. They do it in a not too different way like you expressed it, you would like to see it. And that could be a little game changer, but it's not the big bang overall, because it has to do with the attitude from my perspective, as Thomas said. And it has to do with the culture, and it has to do with that people are curious and a bit experimenting and listening and taking a break to get educated properly how to use these toys. Yeah? And not only running on the hill when agentic voodoo is shouting and everybody sings to play with the drums and run after the sound, but take a break, relax.
Yeah, but let's come back to the CRM vendors, because it's near and dear to my heart lately, because I think that once again, instead of fixing the core problems that exist in CRM applications in general, companies use this new technology as a way to sort of mask the problems and to sort of what's the word for it? Deflect the real issues that are in their software, right? So now we have agents. Agents are going to change the world, but are agents really going to change the way a CRM system really works? The answer is no at the end of the day.
No.
And is the data still in CRM systems very static and very outdated? Typically, yes. Right. And until the data, I think companies need to focus on two things. One is data and really getting it right. I think, because, you always see vendors, and I can say this from, way too many years in the CRM space. I can't tell you how many times I had the same customer over different periods of my career move to a different CRM system. Thinking that it was going to
time or what?
Thinking that it was going to solve their problem, right? And the reality is, it doesn't solve the problem, right? Changing CRM systems doesn't solve the problem at all, right? Because the problem is still with data, and it's the use and how you use these things at the end of the day, and the fact that these systems just aren't very, they're hard to get up and running, right? Let's be clear. CRM systems, especially if you go the full gamut, right? If you go starting sales, service, marketing, e-commerce, all these platforms, right? That are tied to CRM, they're hard to get up and running, right? It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time, right? We've not solved, right, how to make these things easy, right? If anything, it's gotten more complicated and it's gotten worse at the end of the day, So if you think about AI and the promise of AI, right? The promise is automation and making these things smarter and better, but I don't think you can take a 20-year-old platform and slap this shit on and say, oh, now I have a smart system. It doesn't work like that.
Where's the Apple moment?
It's just it's another Band-Aid on something. Okay. Instead of fixing the root problems, which is, And I do believe wholeheartedly that these big systems will come to an end. I think as the technology gets better, as the programs get better, the ability to write code using a machine, being able to really say what you want out of a system and build it yourself, as this gets better and better, why would you buy a packaged software at the end of the day? Especially when a machine can change the code and make it better in a matter of seconds.
So you think this will be right?
I think over time, the accuracy will get better and better. And I think companies will realize that they can save themselves a ton of freaking money at the end of the day. Right. I mean, to be honest, let me just ask you guys a question. Do you think that any software company has come up with anything new in the CRM space in the last 30 fucking years? I'll tell you point blank, they haven't.
Nope. Yeah.
They haven't. Nobody has come up with what we've come up with over the years is more band-aids to make things a little more usable. We get better UI. We got, we come up with little things like, CDPs and data clouds and,
Band-aids, yeah.
It's just band-aids at the end of the day. But have we really has the industry come up with anything that is really earth-shattering, that changes the way that people do business using these products? The answer is no.
And that was my provocative shout in, where is the Apple moment? I was missing that Apple moment of ease of use, deliver the stuff I want.
Let's backtrack a little. Use two words, smart and applications, and basically in that sequence. So this is a term that I am thinking about quite some time already. So define a smart application.
A smart application, first of all, is one that can push. It's not a pull, right? If you think about applications today, they're all pull applications. You have to pull out of it what you want at the end of the day, right? But with new technologies in AI, applications can become smart. They can push to you what you need when you need it and in the right format that you need it. But CRM systems can't do that today. They're not designed for that.
How about defining a smart application as one that adapts itself to the user's needs?
Yeah, but then you're talking about it, which is what I always talk about, which is applications that are truly intelligent, that based on what the person needs, it can be provided. Yeah. It can be pushed, not pulled by the individual.
Do we have I argue that we already have the technologies to do that. So
we do have the technology to do it today. But it means if you're a software vendor, like a Salesforce or a Microsoft, you have to rebuild from scratch. You have to start over again, because you can't just plug that stuff into right. That's what people are trying to do with agentic AI. They're trying to plug these into existing systems to make them look like they're smarter. But the reality is it's just another Band-Aid at the end of the day. It doesn't solve the problem. Doesn't make it more efficient, doesn't make it more effective, doesn't make it more cost efficient at the end of the day.
So you would be, if I understand you correctly, more back to that movement we had already. A focused app could be more beneficial when it's staying on the needs for the task.
Let me put it a different way. Let me put it a different way.
Yeah.
So you can take any of these large 3-letter acronym systems, whether it's ERP, whether it's CRM, and you can go back to the roots of these things, right? Look, when CRM started, it was all about SFA, right? There was no CRM, right? Let's be clear. There was SFA applications, those applications, what happened was, they got to a certain point where they were usable, right? They served a purpose.
Yeah.
Right. But then everybody decided, we have to have suites. So now we're going to plug in service, and now we're going to plug in other things. And now we're going to make this big, complicated system. And what happens when you make big, complicated systems? The ability to change rapidly goes away.
Yeah.
You can't take a platform that has had 20 years of shit built into it. Right. Ooh. And I'm sorry, but every platform out there, right? Whether it's SAP, ERP, whether it's, Salesforce, CRM, Microsoft, all of them have had so many years of constant crap put into them. Legacy, one-off stuff, right? That what happens is these systems become to a point where they can't change anymore. So what are you stuck doing? You're stuck doing what we've been doing for the last 15 years. Is you plug shit in to make it look like it's changing and make it look like it's doing new stuff, right? You put new lipstick on it so that it has a better user interface, right? But the reality is we've not changed, right? And that's why I really believe we have to go back to the basics of building separate, focused applications that solve a problem at the end of the day. Not these big monolithic systems which are in existence today. We have to get back to that, right? Because that's where the innovation is going to come from. That is where the innovation will absolutely come from. Because in these big monolithic systems, it's hard to innovate. It's hard to innovate, which is why a lot of companies end up having to buy other companies, because that's the only way they can innovate. But it doesn't solve the core problem, right? Think about today, if you were to rebuild SFA using the technology that's there today, you could build something that's totally amazing.
Question there. So now we are in this constant circle: suite, best of breed, suite of best of breed. So this, in my lifetime, happened. Well, my CRM lifetime happened probably the third time now. Best of breed brought the promise of breaking the suite and being more nimble, agile, whatever. Put your own lipstick on it, to use your name there. Yep. The consequence that we seen was that we got just the same in a different flavor.
So we got just the same because, to be clear, best of breed never really was best of breed at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. And now we seem to be back into this thing of suites again, right? Which to me, the only reason, companies like SAP and others want to sell suites is because it sells more software at the end of the day. It's more money in the bank for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's all it is, right? Mm-hmm. But is it really better? No, the answer is no, it's not better, right? Because you can't, right? And best of breed never really took off because of consolidation, to be quite honest.
Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Because what hindered it to become the smart app, which is sorting the role for the seller, the role for the marketeer, or for whoever, for the service technician?
Was because look, the reality was to really continue to innovate and to grow, right? There's constraints, right? You have investors, you have all sorts, right? Money's not endless at the end of the day, right?
Just print some more.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Unfortunately, I wish it worked like that, but it doesn't, right? And you know that you can't, if you just take some of the smart, like some of the really cool startups that are right now, right? And you look at these and you go, okay, now how many of them will still be in existence a year from now, 2 years from now, right? The question is probably not many, because some will survive, but I think a lot of them will get swallowed up. And what happens when you swallow up good applications? They die, right? They go to big companies and then they die. They get put out to pasture, right? For various reasons, right? I mean, I can go through the history in this space over the last 30 years and tell you some of the most amazing software that was built that got acquired and ended up getting killed, right? I mean, there were so many good companies that were innovating in the space that got acquired and then they were killed, right? Because for a lot of reasons. Right?
If you can't beat them, buy them.
Can't beat them, buy them, right? And that's what happened. But I think now with AI, with the technology that's continuing to advance, right? And look, we talk about AI and everything else, but you know, I do think the age of supercomputers is coming too. And that will make a big change in how things are done, right? Imagine someday everybody has a supercomputer desktop. The ability to do things, it just changes the world, right? And I think that, you know, right now AI is really costly, right? And you know, talking to a lot of startups that are in the AI space, the costs kill them at the end of the day, right? And as they start to grow and get more customers, the costs don't go down; they increase, right? Which was a phenomenon that everybody forgot about in the SaaS world, because it was no different in the SaaS world, right? Cloud did not get cheaper; it got more expensive. The more customers, the more data, right? Cloud got more expensive as you grew, right? It didn't get cheaper, and I think people always forget about that. Right, that it doesn't get cheaper; it gets more expensive. Right.
This opens. Yeah.
There's one more who wants to take a cut, so it's easy. So it's quite obvious, actually.
Yeah.
So this is cheaper for small fry, but at some point there's a break even, and then it becomes more expensive than DIY.
But I do believe that the future is really about the small companies, startups who focus on the innovation in a particular space, right? And then the ability for companies to take those things and put them together or build their own based on the technology to run their business, right? Monolithic systems, I don't think they will survive the next 5 years. I think what we will see is, as technology and computing gets better and better, that these monolithic systems will either have to change or they'll eventually be swallowed up, and customers will realize they don't need all that crap at the end of the day. I mean, there was a thing years ago. I remember at Siebel, towards the end, we started looking at things in a different way. Like, we looked at all the views that we had built, right? And people who know Siebel know that it was very extensive across so many industries, right? And we're not talking just breadth, it was depth as well, right? You know, and you know, when we really looked at it, we realized that customers only used maybe 20% of all the stuff that was in the software. Right. And I think that's no different for any other large monolithic system.
But even if I mean, we had ideas of solving that, well, basically since I can think about it. So again, since the mid-90s. So it's about decomposition, as you said. So we had attempts like microservices, and right now we have whatever is called agentic that actually has the option, offers the option of rebuilding systems in another way by having, let's say, decentralized, decomposed functionalities that somehow magically, or better than magically, can interact with each other. So why didn't that work in the past decades? It can't only be the vendors that are the culprit there, because the first promise of companies like Salesforce was decompose.
It was, but it was for, if you remember, Salesforce was for a very specific purpose, right?
Well, they could,
right? It was
well, the name was program, yeah. The name was program, yeah.
And it worked, right? It worked. It was very simplistic, very easy to get up and running, very easy to use, right? They innovated in that space, not just the UI, but the way they did other things, right? They were truly innovative. But as it got bigger and bigger, that sort of went away, because then you started adding more things and more things and more things. And now you've gone from, you know, what was the true bread and butter, which was SFA, to a big monolithic system that includes everything from sales, marketing, commerce, right? You go down the line, right? It's huge.
But
right?
Isn't that the outcome mandatorily a monolithic system? I mean,
no, it doesn't have to be.
So why does it always happen?
But because that's what, because when you start to grow and you realize that you have to diverse, especially when you become a public company. You know, you have to make, you've got to make more and more products to get more and more revenue. And what are you going to do? You're going to build them. You're not going to have separate systems. You're going to build them all into the same system, same platform that you have. And that's what leads to the monolithic stuff, right? And unfortunately, it's what happens. And there's no way around that unless you rethink these things and you think about it differently, right? Can a company truly be the best in a space without becoming a monolithic system? What are the trade-offs for doing that?
My question here is your statement pro agentic, separate small bits and pieces, very focused. Can this add into the open source idea? And to a certain extent that we have citizen programming or guided programming by some knowledgeable people to get these smarter apps, which are role and job focused, on the road?
You could. I mean, look, it's worked in the past, open source, right? You know, take Red Hat, right, as an example, right? I even take SugarCRM as an example, right? It always amazes me today when I see some of these companies, CRM vendors, who took that open source and did amazing things with it at the end of the day, right? And they're focused on one particular area, right? And they have small businesses that thrive, right? They're not going to be $100 million businesses at the end of the day, but they're okay being where they're at, right? So, which is a trade-off, right? Are you happy being the best at what you do? If you're a private, you can do that for quite a long time. Look, Zoho, good example, right? Now, some of their stuff is truly monolithic in a way too. I mean, let's be clear. They've been building for a very long time. They've been in the space. And so, I mean, but they're private. They can do what they want to do, and they can focus. They can regionalize in a very different way from other vendors, which is what they do very well, right? But they have a luxury of being able to do that, right? They're not a public company at the end of the day,
Isn't there, to some extent, a need to have at least let's say, a common foundation, even if you are going, let's call it microservices? So in smaller chunks or smaller entities of capabilities that are combined to some extent. I mean, also Plattner had this idea already late in the 90s. The outcome was a failed business by designer, but the idea was be able to compose systems out of smaller chunks.
It is, and it's the same with like that concept has been around in many different forms for a long time, right? We talk about composable architectures today, right? But the reality is it's never really taken off, to be quite honest. Because in the end, it's the same technology. It was the same technology, right? It didn't really make things more effective and efficient at the end of the day. And what were you going to tie those systems into? You still have to tie them into these big monolithic systems at the end of the day. Because nobody was going to start from scratch and build. Let's just take, another topic like ERP. Right? If you think about the technology that exists today and the knowledge, right? You truly could build a new ERP system that is, truly composable, right? Using AI, using the tools that are out there, probably much more effective and efficient, especially given today's like manufacturing technologies and how they manufacture, right? But the reality is, who's going to do that? That's a tough market to go after at the end of the day. So now you come to the other problem, which is, how do you go after the mega giants like the SAPs and ERP and the Salesforces and CRM, right? It takes a lot, right? It takes a lot to eat into that market share, right? It's not something that, and I know a lot of companies, when they start, they dream of that, right? That's what they're going to do. But the reality is, and I've lived it, it's not simple at the end of the day. Taking 1% market share from a giant takes a lot of effort and a lot of money at the end of the day, right? And when you go up against the giants who have unlimited marketing budgets, it's tough, right? How do you get the presence of mind, right? Because it's really hard to get that in this industry, right? Unless you're spending tons and tons of money. And you look at the companies who are spending tons of money, right? They're giants. And why are they giants? Because they have presence everywhere you go. Everywhere you look.
Where is the smart, safe pond to grow and not get within the sharks and the piranhas?
I think you have to rethink about business and what you want to achieve in business at the end of the day, right? Look, I'm a capitalist. I always have been, always will be. But I think even there, we have to rethink, right, about this industry. And if you start a company, what's your goals at the end of the day, right? Yeah. Is it to do something good that changes? But I think a lot of companies don't start with that premise. They start with, they want to make money. Especially in Silicon Valley nowadays, right? Just look at all the stupid AI companies that pop up, right? I mean, and then you go and look at some of these companies and you go, you got to be kidding me, right? I seriously, I mean, I think, there needs to be a reset here, right? As to what are we trying to achieve, right? What do companies want to achieve at the end of the day, right? do companies really want better experiences for their customers? Do they really give a shit? No, I don't think so. Some do, but I would say most don't at the end of the day. They want the perception that they're doing better for their customers, but the reality is they're just in there to make the money at the end of the day. And I think this is a problem, and it's no different with, I think, a lot of the vendors in the software space, right? I think, they talk about wanting to do better for their customers, but the reality is, I think, it's just not true at the end of the day. They just want more money, and if you're a public company, you got to keep that revenue coming in, right? If you don't, you get hammered.
Yep, as SAP did for years. So that's when they started their transition into the cloud quite late. But as we are shortly getting to the top of the hour, and in order to not continue this for 2 or 3 hours, which we easily could, I think. So,
and would enjoy.
What do you think would, let's say, the established players, like the Microsofts, the SAPs, the Oracles, the Salesforces, Adobe even. So what, maybe Zoho, what could / should they do in order to first keep their stakeholders happy? Stakeholders being employees, suppliers, customers, and investors, maybe the CEO too, while transitioning into a world that actually goes into smarter applications in the smart sense that we discussed, and not into the world that just gives me better analytics.
My 2 cents on that is really simple. If I was the Mark Benioff, I would go out. I would start a small company, private, away from the core of the company. I would hire totally different people who were not involved in building the first Salesforce. And I would put together a think tank to build the next generation of people who have not been exposed to the industry, who have not been building those products, who come from different worlds, who can look at those problems in a very different way. The whole goal would be to disrupt yourself at the end of the day before somebody else disrupts you.
Okay, so Tom Siebel did something right with C3.ai?
Yeah. Well,
he didn't go the whole way, but
I mean, look, there's a lot of similarities between C3.ai and Siebel at the end of the day, especially in the data structures, right? But I don't think that's a good example of it, because I think it's a different industry, different, what they're doing is a little different. I think you totally have to reinvent, right? You want to disrupt yourself, right? I mean, look, these companies have tons of smart people, right? Not to mention all the smart people they have access to at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right. And SAP tried that with Business by Design, right? But it never really became a way to disrupt yourself. That was never the goal of Business by Design, right? Whereas this, I think you have to do it in a way that is truly about, how do I disrupt what I currently have, right? What's going to get me through the next 5 years, right? Forget the long term, right? Because the way technology is changing, I don't think you can think long term. I think you have to build in a way that makes it easy to change, easy to move, flexibility has to be built into these systems in a way like it never was before, right? That's the only way. Or, it's going to be some little startup that's going to come along, like Salesforce did to the industry when it started, right? It came along, it disrupted the entire industry. And, look, the next one will come eventually. It will happen, right? Look, the technology, and I think, people are going to start realizing they can do things differently. You just think of the way people are manufacturing today, right? With 3D manufacturing and all this stuff, right? This is like, they've totally upended the manufacturing space, right? Shoe manufacturers, look at what they've done with 3D printing and the ability to build shoes, right? Think about that. Do current systems help those guys? No, they have to have a whole nother way of doing things. Because they're constantly changing their models nowadays in order to survive. Yeah. And the same has to go for software, right? It has to be flexible enough to change the model.
Love that one.
Conscious of everybody's time, because I think we could continue this forever. I'd have our famous last words. If you were to found a CRM company right now, which you may or may not do, what would you focus on? That might be a tip to somebody else who's smart enough to pull it off.
I think if I would focus on, I would take one of the core problems that exist, right? Let's just take SFA as an example, right? And like the AskDana.com guys have done, right? They solved a critical problem, right? Which was how to make better use of a salesperson's time, right? How do you solve that, right? I think that's, if I was to go start a company, but it's 68, I don't think that's going to happen, because I think my interests are in other places nowadays. I don't think I have the energy to go do that. But look, there's a lot of smart people out there who I think, if it's like the old saying goes, you have to peel back the onion to get to the key core piece, right? What is the core problem that you really want to solve that's going to change the way people do business, right? I think that's what you have to get to at the end of the day, right? You have to, if I was going to start a company, it would be focused on solving a single use case that could be the best, right? And that is, I think, the key, right? How do you become the best at what you do, right? That's it. Simple as that.
Cool.
Like it. Love it.
Love it. Right. Thanks for that. So this was an amazingly fast hour. Well, and it begs for repetition, actually. So if you still have the inclination to talk to these boring guys again, thanks for your time. Really, thanks for your time, Bob.
Not a problem.
So
it's always nice to sort of reconnect with people.
Yeah, indeed. And maybe we see each other, meet at some or another sugar event, maybe.
Yeah, or you're always welcome to come visit me.
Yeah, let me find whether. Well, right now I'd probably have doubts about abilities to re-enter this country, yes, with all the BS that's going on. But anyway, so thanks a lot. Let's continue this a little later. And for our guest, thanks a lot, Renee, Ed, and last but not least, John, for all your comments.
Thank you.
And tune in next week when we are looking into, well, again, AI, how it's going on. This time coming from the other side with former analyst Dan Miller, who was the founder of Opus Research and retired too. So looks like we are meeting only old people these days. Sorry, I'm old myself.
Wise people.
Probably I'm the kid in this group here, but still.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'm the youngest one at least.
You're the youngest. Yeah, that's true.
So see you next time. We are going backstage now and hope to see you next time too.
All right. Thanks, guys.